All right, so tonight I was going in one direction earlier this week, and then I was having a conversation actually with Tiffany today. She probably doesn't know this, but she was saying how she was having to create a training for her job to help people through transition and changes in their job and how to help them through that. And so she was telling me about that, and I said something to her that I've never really thought about, but I just said, in order to grow, you have to be willing to change. For something to grow, it has to change. And then I walked out because I was actually heading down here a little early just to kind of finish up what I had already been getting ready, and it just wouldn't go away from me. And so I started going on a dialogue with the Holy Spirit. So tonight, bear with me a little bit for kind of fuddling through this because it's only about 3 hours old. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about, in order to grow, something has to change. This last week, me and Craig went up to a cabin a couple hours away, up past Pioneer. And it sits up on a hill, on the kind of the crest of the hill. So the back of it, where the deck is, about 2.5 stories high, and it just looks over this valley. And for as far as you can see is just trees everywhere. It's beautiful. And so we were just sitting out on that deck. We sat out there for hours and hours and just enjoying God's nature and each other. Conversation, but really just soaking up God's nature and his beauty and his creativity and all he does with his nature. And so I was sitting there and I started looking at the trees and noticing all the different kind of trees that there are in a forest and just how unique they are. But it's my brother's cabin, so I get to go whenever I want, and I try to get there at least a couple times a year, sometimes not. But every time I go, I notice the trees are a little different. They change a little bit. They get a little taller. They can get a little bigger. Some of them have more leaves than they did before. Some of them are kind of on their way on the downhill side, and they're losing leaves. But it's always changing. And I started with the Holy Spirit was like, yeah, everything I created grows. And everything to be able to grow has to change. So I started thinking, okay, God, is there something that doesn't grow? Is there anything that God created that doesn't grow or change? And so I've been thinking about this today in the last 3 hours of, God, what is it about you and in your creation that requires growth and change? So then I started looking at myself. And how many of you had a newborn? How many of you know there's a lot of growth and a lot of change that happens really fast? Because you notice it with your kids. Now, when you get older, you don't quite notice the change as much, right? But you are in constant change. You're in constant growth. They say your ears never stop growing, and your nose never stops growing. So we're in constant change, whether you like it or not. Some of us at a certain age wish that change would slow down. But God created us to grow and change. So I started looking through real quick, and a character in the Bible that's really intrigued me lately is the life of Peter. Peter had an extraordinary life. And, we all know that he stuck his foot in his mouth a lot, right? He did some really stupid things. But we also know the end of the story, that he did amazing things. And so I want to go through his journey a little bit tonight. But I did want to start in Ecclesiastes and just talk about seasons a little bit. And this is Ecclesiastes 3, verse 1. There's a time for everything, a season for every activity under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and the time to refrain, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love, a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. So God created us to grow and change. He created seasons. Why do we have seasons? Why do we have distinctions? Because they change, right? Right now, we're in the middle of a season changing, and the weather doesn't know what to do. Gets warm, gets cold, gets rainy, gets hot, gets back, because it's in the middle of a change, and that's how God created us. So Peter is a very interesting man. So let's look at when Jesus first meets Peter, or at least recorded his first meeting. This is Luke. It's in Luke chapter 5. And so Jesus is out. He's preaching to a group of people. He's at the Sea of Galilee. And so he asked some fishermen that had been fishing all night. They didn't catch anything. They're cleaning their nets. And he asked them, hey, can I get on your boat so I can speak from your boat to all these people? Because if you don't know, water will amplify your voice. So he went out onto the water so his voice would be amplified. So they're like, sure, go ahead. They're like, we're done. We didn't catch anything. We're done for the day or for the night. And go out and preach. So he starts preaching. And so he's done. And then we're going to pick this up in verse 4. It says, when he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, which is Peter, put out into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, I will let down my nets. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So I want to look at a couple things here. Peter's first response to Jesus was, hey, we've been fishing all night. What do you mean, put out our nets? He just started coming up with excuses why this wasn't going to work. That was his first response to Jesus, was like, you have no clue what you're talking about. I am a fisherman. Which I don't know. I grew up around fishermen. My grandfather was a commercial fisherman. He also owned a commercial fishing supply store. So I grew up around real fishermen, not the ones that go away for the weekend, sit on the side of a creek and, sip something to drink and No, these are guys that are out in the ocean for weeks at a time. So their language is a little different than what normal people's would be. And so I kind of grew up around that because I'd be around my grandpa's store and these fishermen would come in, they would tell their stories with very colorful language. And so I'm not sure exactly how Peter said this. I don't know if Luke might have left out some words in here. But he was like, buddy, you're off your rocker. We fished all night. There's nothing out there going on. But he did it anyways. And then the second thing I want you to keep in your head while we go through this is that it says the catch was so heavy that the nets began to tear. That it was so heavy that the nets started to come apart. That's how big the catch was. But the nets started tearing. So then, after this, Jesus calls them to be a fisher of men. He travels with Jesus. He's a disciple. And we know there's parts throughout of Peter's story where he sticks his foot in his mouth quite a bit. He doesn't like to be told what to do. And he likes to react before he probably really thinks about it. But one thing Peter does do is when they're in the boat and the storm's happening and Jesus is walking by on water, and he goes, Jesus, if that's you, tell me to come out. He was the one willing to get out of the boat and walk on water. Little impulsive, right? He's a fisherman. He knows what water, a raging sea would do to you. And he jumps out of the boat and he gets to walk on water, right? But this is Peter. None of the other disciples did this. So Peter's a little compulsive. And then You know, when Jesus is being arrested, how many know the story? What does he do to the people that are trying to arrest him? He cuts one of the soldiers' ears off. And Jesus is like, oh, this guy again. Puts the ear back on, creates the miracle, the ear goes back on. But Peter continually is just kind of the antagonist. But along the journey, he has to either change or he's not going to be around for very long. He's not going to grow unless he changes. And there's a point where Jesus gives this amazing message about people have to eat his flesh and drink his blood to follow him, which freaks out the crowd. We know he's talking about communion and his crucifixion, and he's talking about communion. But at the time, communion did not exist. So they weren't quite sure what he was talking about. And they all freaked out, and they all left. And he turns to his disciples and said, hey, are you going to leave too? But it's Peter that goes, we have nowhere else to go. Like, where else are we going to go? So he starts changing a little bit, his view of life a little bit. But we get to the end, and Jesus, before he dies, he's having a conversation, and he's telling his disciples, hey, my time is almost up. I'm about to leave. I'm about to die, resurrect, go to heaven. You know, he's kind of using cryptic language, which he did a lot. And Peter goes, and he tells the disciples is that where I'm going, you can't go yet. You'll be able to go there in the future, but you can't go there yet. And Peter goes, hey, I want to go with you. I'll go with you, even if I have to die. And Jesus goes, you sure you want? You sure you would do that? Are you really sure you would do that? And he goes, because you're going to deny me 3 times. And then he goes into, but you guys are going to be okay. If you read that whole interaction of Jesus saying, hey, you're going to deny me, he never condemns them. He says, yeah, you're going to deny me, and then he goes on and says, but you're going to be okay. You guys are going to be okay. And then so Jesus, obviously, crucifixion, dies, resurrects, has a few visits with the disciples. And then if you switch over to John 21. John chapter 21, verse 4. So this is after Jesus has died. He's resurrected. He's met with the disciples, appeared to the disciples a few times. But now they're back at the Sea of Galilee, the same place where Jesus first meets them and calls them to be disciples. They're out fishing again. And we're going to pick up Peter's story, and this is verse 4. So they're out fishing. They'd been fishing all night. Again, not catching anything. And it says, early in the morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize that it was Jesus. He called to them, friends, haven't you any fish? No, they answered. He said, throw your nets on the right side of the boat, and you will find some. When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Notice there, Peter doesn't say anything. Right? He doesn't say, hey, buddy, we've been fishing all night. Haven't caught anything. He's grown a little bit. He's changed a little bit. So he doesn't respond at all. They just throw the nets on the other side. There's no excuses. So they throw the nets on the other side, and they get a large number of fish. Verse 7. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter. Now this is really interesting. It's just a little side note. This is what, the Bible is so fascinating. If you look for these small things. So who's the author of this book? John. We're in John, right? John's the author. Verse 7 says, then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter. Who's the disciple that Jesus loved? John. Isn't it interesting how he writes about himself? He doesn't say, hey, John the disciple said to Peter. No, he says, the disciple Jesus loved. Isn't it amazing how even in the Bible, the written word, how Jesus still wants us to have our own personality and our own way of doing things? Got a little quiet. John writes, then the disciples whom Jesus loved. He's letting everybody throughout history know he's the disciple that Jesus loved. Out of all 12 of them, that I'm the guy that he really loved. And he says it multiple times. It just, when you read the word, there's some really interesting just nuggets in there. So nothing to do with tonight, but I love John. I think John and Peter had some interesting conversations with each other. You read through the Gospel of John, he always is picking on Peter a little bit. But he says, when the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord, as soon as Simon Peter heard him say, it is the Lord, he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off and jumped into the water. Why? I read some commentaries on this because I wanted to figure out, what does it mean that he put on his outer garment? How many think that's a little weird? If you're going swimming, who puts a jacket on to go swimming, right? Obviously, it's a different time, a different culture. So I read some stuff on it. They say wasn't like he was out there fishing naked. He probably had some clothes on, like some short, a loincloth or something. But it was traditional in the day that you didn't greet somebody without a coat on, which could be true, but I obviously we don't really know for sure. This is my little take, so this is just me. For one, he's a fisherman. I don't think he cared what his appearance looked like. Just knowing fishermen, they're not real high on their appearance. But he also knew Jesus, and I think he was with Jesus long enough to know that the religious customs didn't need to apply for him to meet with Jesus. I think, and this is again just my opinion, is he was the disciple that walked on water. I don't know. Did he think that he was just going to walk on water? And that's why he put his coat on, because he didn't think he was going to swim. Obviously, he swam. It says he went into the water. But it's just the interesting thought is that I don't know if he just thought, hey, I can walk on water. This could happen again. Jesus is there. He's called to me. I can go to him. So just a thought. But it kind of shows his growth and willingness to change. So verse 8, the other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire burning in coals with a fish on it. If you know, Jesus already had fish and some bread. Jesus said to them, bring some of the fish you have just caught. Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. A little difference between the two stories. One, Peter doesn't come up with an excuse why it wouldn't work to throw on the other side. And two, the nets didn't tear, even though the catch should have tore the nets. Because Peter was in the middle of growing, and he was willing to change. Because he understood he had to change to be able to grow. Up until this point, he makes a lot of mistakes. He just denied Jesus 3 times. But from this point on, you see him accelerate in his growth. You see him do amazing things through Acts and the rest of the New Testament, all the stories of what he does and how he operates. You don't see him stick his foot in his mouth very much after this point, because he embraced change, because he knew that's what it would take to grow. And in this story, he is willing to fish on the other side without an excuse. and he was willing to go after Jesus even though he had screwed up. He knew the nature of Jesus would be, even if I screwed up, I can go to him. I can get redemption. I can get freedom. I can get breakthrough through Jesus, even if I screwed up. Now, early in his life, that wasn't the case. But he had learned to embrace change so he can grow. So right after that, then, if you know the story, Jesus fully restores him, asks him, hey, Peter, do you love me? And he's like, of course I do. And he does it 3 times, the 3 times he denied him. And then Jesus talks to Peter about how he's going to die. He kind of lays out, hey, this is how you're going to die. And it's interesting, Peter, when Jesus tells him kind of how he's going to die, he turns around and again points to the disciple that Jesus loved. Said, what about him? What about this guy? And Jesus is like, if I want him to live forever, he'll live forever. Don't worry about it. And Peter could have took that as, Jesus doesn't love me. Like, he doesn't love me. He doesn't want me. He doesn't, he's going to show favoritism to somebody else. And use it as an excuse to spiral out of control. But he didn't. He chose to change and grow into the man that he was called to be. And he was able to take that and revolutionize the world. So when he came to towns, they said, hey, this person has changed the world, has come here. He's turned places upside down, and he's come here. Because he was willing to change to grow. And God's always asking us, are we willing to grow? Are we willing to change? Are we willing to transition into what he's calling us to do? And it's not a sin issue necessarily. It's not, hey, we're so bad, we're so horrible that we have to change. Now, there might be some things in our lives that we know we need to change. But you look at a tree, a fruit tree, when it needs to bear fruit, it has to change, right? A little bud has to come out. It has to bloom, and then the fruit comes out of that. So it has to change to bear fruit. It's not you change when things aren't going well. You change to get better, to bear more fruit. Like right now I have a 16-year-old daughter, which she's amazing. In 2 years, she'll be 18, she'll graduate high school. I'm going to have to change. I'm not looking forward to that. It's not a bad thing. It's not like, oh, I'm really screwing up, so I have to change. No, she's going to be an adult. And if you're a parent that's had a teenager that's now an adult, you understand, which I don't fully understand because I've never had to do this, that there's a change that has to happen for there to be growth. But I've been around youth. Did youth as volunteer and all that for about 10 years. So I've seen the transition a lot with parents. And I've seen parents that do it really, really well, and I've seen parents and kids that do it really, really bad. And it really comes down to either one of 2 things happening. Either the kid's not willing to change to grow, they're not willing to mature and become an adult, or the parents aren't willing to change and grow and learn how to have an adult relationship with their kid that's now an adult. And when one of those 2 don't happen, it's disastrous. And it can have lifelong complications. But when I've seen it, when both of them embrace their transitions and embrace, hey, I have to change as a parent. Or as a kid, I have to change and I have to be an adult. And a parent says, I have to change. I have to treat them like an adult, but they're still my kid, which can be really difficult because they're always your baby. She's 16, but she's my baby. So change isn't necessarily, I have something wrong with me. The tree doesn't have something wrong with it when it changes. But to bear fruit, it has to change. It has to grow. So I think God's asking us, are we willing to change so we can grow? He wants us to grow. He wants your life to be fruitful. But you have to be willing to grow. And to be able to grow, it has to change. Something has to change. And it could be going from good to great or great to amazing. It's not going bad to good. And there's all of us have our baggage. All of us have our stuff that can get better, that we can change and grow and get better. But God's really asking us in this season, are you willing to grow? Because his disciples and Peter, at the end of the day, even though he screwed up a lot, he was willing to grow. And doesn't always look pretty. But the reason it works is because we have an amazing God. We have a God that loves us. And we get our breakthrough with him. I love where Craig went with it in transition and the team went with it. Is that it's him that brings it. It's him that sings over us and helps us with that change. If I can have the band go ahead and come on up as we close out. We want to spend some time tonight doing some ministry, but I think this can be a really big deal if we don't realize that we're in constant change and constant growth. It's not one of those things where you beat yourself up every day like, oh, I'm a horrible person, God, what do I have to change about myself? It's not that at all. It's going on a journey with the Holy Spirit of, hey, today I want to grow. What do I need to grow in today? What do I need to adjust? What do I need to change today? What do I need to water? What do I need to fertilize? Because Jesus gave the parable of the fig tree. And it's basically, the parable is a farmer went out and planted a fig tree, and over 3 years it never bore fruit. And so he went to the guy that was taking care of his vineyard and said, hey, this hasn't produced fruit for 3 years. Dig it up, get rid of it. And the caretaker says, hey, give me 1 more year. I'll dig up around it, fertilize it, and let's see if it bears fruit another year. Let's give it another year. And that is how Jesus sees us. He's not looking to cut us down and cut us out. He's like, hey, maybe you haven't produced some fruit in that area. Let's give them another year. Let's give them a little bit of fertilizer. Let's give them some water. And let's see what happens this year. And then that year goes by. Hey, let's do another year. Let's try this another year. Let's keep going. Because I see something moving here. And that's how our God is. He doesn't cut us out. He doesn't say, hey, you're not willing to grow, you're done. He's like, hey, let's dig around a little bit and let's fertilize you and let's see if you'll grow a little bit here. So tonight, if you're wanting to just be willing to take the chance to grow and ask the Holy Spirit tonight, what is it in me that needs to grow? What is it in me that needs to change? And again, it's not a sin issue. If you do have a sin issue, deal with it. It's a great time to deal with it. There's a Father here that loves you very much and wants you to grow and be whole and be free tonight. But if tonight you want to make a stand, just say, God, I'm willing to grow. Whatever that takes, whatever I need to change and grow in, I want to do that. If that's you, I just ask you to stand because I want to pray over you. Because I think God is up to something in all of our lives. Because he does value you. He thinks you do have a beautiful name. Because he did name you in your mom's womb. And he has a plan for you. Because he wants you to be a beautiful tree that produces a ton of fruit. So Holy Spirit, I ask right now that you just start revealing those places of growth in us. That you've planted us in really good soil. That you've planted us in your soil. And all we have to be is willing to grow. That we have to be willing to let you be the God that loves us and helps us grow. So Holy Spirit, right now, we just ask that you start speaking to every one of us in those areas that we need to grow in. And as we know, growth and change is not comfortable, but it's necessary to bear fruit. But we have the ultimate comforter with us. We have the ultimate God that just loves to hold us as we go through a growth cycle. So Holy Spirit, come in the way that bears us fruit. God, if we need to be held, God, I ask that you would just hold people right now that are going through pain. Holy Spirit, we just ask that you water us right now with your presence and that you overflow us tonight. So just put your hands out like you're receiving a gift. So Holy Spirit, we just are here. Know that you are a good God that gives good gifts. So God, we're asking for gifts to grow tonight. That we walk out of here with gifts of grace and mercy to be able to grow in you, to be able to bear fruit. So Holy Spirit, I just ask that you prune us where we need to be pruned, and to fertilize us and water us where we need to grow.
Didn't want heaven without us, so Jesus, you brought heaven down. My sin was great, but your love was greater. What could separate us now? 'Cause what a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a beautiful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a beautiful name it is. The name of Jesus. The death could not hold you. The veil tore before you. You silenced the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring the praise of your glory.
anybody that has headaches related to something in their neck, like they're connected, like your neck feels either out of alignment or, hey, we're gonna see that healed today. We're gonna see that go. The other thing is when we grow and change, one of the things that we get to do is we get to what I call cheat. One of the names of God is Lord of the Breakthrough. And so what I want to encourage you guys to do is some of you guys, as you're trying to change and grow, you feel like you might be somebody that he dug up around you. Like, hey, I'm doing the same thing again, but I'm not moving forward. I want to ask you guys to come forward. We're going to pray for you. And we're going to ask the Lord of the Breakthrough to take you through. You look in 2 Samuel, and it's chapter 5, and you look at the little story between like 17 and 21. And David, after he was anointed king, he felt like he had established Israel as his kingdom. And then the Philistines heard they had anointed David as king, and they came to kill him. So David ran for the stronghold to hide from the Philistines. In that moment, the Philistines camped in a place called the Valley of Rephaim. Rephaim actually means the Valley of the Giant. And David looked out at the giant and said, Lord of the Breakthrough, am I gonna win? And it was in that moment, this is what I call cheating. God says, you're gonna win, go. So in the areas where we need the Lord of the Breakthrough, when we're trying to grow and we're trying to change and we keep finding that we're running circles, it's then that we get to cheat and grab the Lord of the Breakthrough. And we get the strategies and the understanding to make sure we don't go around one more time. So we just want to give you guys an opportunity for breakthrough. That no more do you have to go around one more time. We're going to ask for strategies and understanding, and we believe that'll happen. So anybody that wants prayer for that, I'm going to invite you forward. And then I want to pray for the lady with headaches, if she doesn't mind.
What a beautiful name